الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. Peace be with you. Today's show will be started off with a commentary session on the Holy Quran by Brother Shabir. He will be discussing with us chapter 101 from the Quran. Brother Shabir, can you give us a brief overview of this chapter?
Yes, chapter 101 is entitled the chapter of the calamity, more like the noise of clamor. It refers to the Day of Judgment, and Al-Qari'ah, which is the name of this surah, is also the name, one of the names of the Day of Judgment. The Day of Judgment here is referred to as that calamity. And the chapter just warns humankind that on that day people will be like scattered moths before God, all crowded together. The mountains will be passing away, become like carded wool, ruffled. And what we have to look forward to is that those whose scales will be heavy with good deeds will have a pleasant life. Those who, on the other hand, will have a scale light with good deeds will eventually end up in the abyss. And this chapter describes the abyss as a place of extremely scorching fire.
All right, let's get deeper into this surah. Let's see what else you can tell us about the surah.
Well, the surah is very interesting because it has this kind of ring to it. The chapters generally have a rhyme, especially the short chapters, they rhyme throughout. And this particular chapter has a kind of ring. It says, Al-Qari'ah, Mal-Qari'ah, wa ma adraka Mal-Qari'ah. You hear a continuation there, a repetition of the name of the chapter, and also the name given here for the Day of Judgment. It has this kind of impact on people, so that when the early Muslims heard this, and when the non-Muslim Arabs heard this, they were quite moved by it, because it has this kind of way of gripping the listener. So it says the calamity. Oh, what is the calamity, and what will make you understand what the calamity is? It's almost like saying, you know, something terrible is going to happen, and you think about what terrible things can happen, and then it goes to explain to you when your ears are perked up and you're ready to listen. Now, the fact that it tells us that the mountains will become like carded wool, is a reference to the things of this life that we hold to be dear and we take to be permanent. This chapter is reminding us that, in fact, these things are not as permanent as they seem. Solid as the mountains are, in fact, they will on this day become like nothing. They will be torn to bits. And the important thing that should really matter for us then on the Day of Judgment is what we should plan for now. That whoever's scale is good with, is heavy with good deeds will have eternal happiness, and on the other hand, the other people whose scales are light with good deeds will have damnation. So this is what is most important in life, and that is what people should be looking forward to on the whole. So this surah, this chapter puts for humankind everything in perspective. It tells us about what is more important and what is not so important.
Mm-hmm. So can you finish it off by giving us a final overview of the surah?
Yeah, in giving a final overview, I should add a point about the scales being light or heavy. A lot of people have the conception that as Muslims you have to do everything perfectly right, and if you don't, you cannot enter heaven. That is not true, because what this chapter actually tells us is that the people who will have everlasting bliss are those whose scales are heavy with good deeds. Now, Ibn Kathir, one of the classical commentators on the Quran, said that what this means is that one whose good deeds are more than the evil deeds will have this everlasting paradise. So it means that one might in fact have committed a lot of sins, but if his good deeds are more than his sins, he will enter paradise and have everlasting pleasure. On the other hand, those whose deeds are more evil than good, they will have the eternal damnation. So it's not that human beings have to be perfect, but they have to be trying, and if they are trying, they will be successful.
Oh, okay. So basically in this surah, while it is short, it does teach us a lot, not only to us New Age Muslims, but I guess at that time it appealed to everybody's curiosity and did teach them quite a bit. We thank you for that commentary. At this point, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. الله أكبر 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 الله أك
Welcome back to the show. Now we will proceed to our next session, which is a little discussion we will have on the topic of peace in Islam with Brother Shabir Ali. Brother Shabir, these days the media portrays Islam in a very negative manner. We hear of bombings all across the world, from suicide bombings to snipers on the loose, just going out and killing people on random. At this point, can Islam really claim to be a religion of peace?
Well, I think we need to understand the events in their proper perspective. The snipers, of course, have never had anything to do with Islam, but people have committed other violent acts in the name of the religion of Islam. And it needs to be clarified to the public that, in fact, these acts do not really have anything to do with Islam. These are acts perpetrated for political purposes, and the name of Islam is dragged in order to give legitimacy to what is done. On the other hand, we should add that some people have a genuine misunderstanding of Islam. Islam has been misunderstood not only by outsiders, but even some who are Muslims and trying to be good Muslims. They have taken certain verses of the Quran, certain examples from the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they have misapplied them. They have divorced them from their context and given them new meanings. You see, there is a certain context in which violence has been justifiable in the past. But life has evolved such that in modern times we have come to appreciate nonviolence. We have come to see that there are ways of resolving conflicts without resorting to violence. And since that is the wisdom that God has given us, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, and Muslims should be the first ones to grab hold of that guidance and appreciate the good God who gave us that guidance and appreciate the use of nonviolence in solving our disputes and conflicts.
Well, keeping that in mind, touching to the past, if you go into the past of Islamic history, many people claim that Islam was actually spread by the sword. How do we counter that?
Well, this is a misunderstanding that was perpetrated in the days of the Crusades when people wanted to paint a negative picture of Islam. They wanted to show Muslims as the monster out there that needs to be killed. They wanted to dehumanize Muslims, and one of the ways in which they tried to do that was to paint a very negative picture of the religion of Islam, to say, well, this is what these guys are about. A similar thing has been done recently with the monsterization of Saddam Hussein and all of the hype that was given in the media about his possible possession of weapons of mass destruction, which now has turned out to be all a farce. So you have to paint the enemy as something that is very gross, that is subhuman, so that you can legitimize your efforts at conquering them, at subjugating them, even decimating them as a population. And so this is a myth that Islam has been spread by the sword. In fact, one of the largest Muslim countries today in terms of population is Indonesia, and it is well known that Muslim armies never entered Indonesia, and it was traders who, by their good conduct, left such a lasting impression on people that people, in fact, decided to embrace Islam based on the good that they saw in Muslims.
Well, it is also true that Islam spread quite rapidly in its early days. It went all the way up to Europe. How did it differ from, let's say, Christianity when it conquered certain places? Because it is true that it almost conquered most of the known world at that time.
Yes, in the ancient world there was always a struggle for power that is not quite like the situation we have now. Now we have international conventions, people agree to certain borders, and everyone agrees to live in peace and live and let live. So we have borders, and we do not cross the borders to invade another country. But in the past these borders were not there, and the international laws that we have now were not in existence. And tribes attacked each other with impunity. If they could attack you, decimate your population, take away your women and children, sell them into slavery, keep them as concubines, all of this was permissible in a dog-eat-dog world of the past. And so whether Islam or Christianity or any identifiable group, everyone had to, in a sense, struggle for their own existence and maintain their survival. So the Muslim nation had to advance, and not only to gain power, but also to preserve what they had. And in a similar way, Christian Rome advanced and gained power and was helped by the establishment of Christianity as Roman Christianity under Constantine after his rise to power in the year 312. So this is something quite known in the ancient world, and it would be a mistake to use that paradigm and try to fit it into our modern context, because we do have now a very different context. The question is, does your religion speak towards this present context? Is there within your religion the accommodation for peace, for tolerance, for nonviolence, and respect for other religions? I think Islam has all of that.
Okay. It's also important to touch upon the fact that when Christians conquered, it was obvious that at times when they conquered a certain area, they would enforce their laws. They would make sure that people in the area would conform to their religion itself. I mean, Spain was a great example. When it was taken over from the Muslims, a lot of atrocities happened at that time. Are Muslims known to have committed these kind of atrocities too?
Well, atrocities have been committed by all peoples in the past. We have had good ones and we have had bad ones. On the whole, the Islamic teachings insist that Muslims cannot attack civilians. When they go into an area, they are not to decimate the population, they cannot cut down trees, and they cannot poison wells. They should go in a very disciplined manner. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, entered Mecca, from which he was previously driven out, his own hometown, from which he and his early followers had to leave their property and family and everything behind. He entered not as a conquering king would do, but he went in as a very peaceful and submissive worshipper. He went into the Kaaba and he performed the worship ceremonies. And every appearance of Islam was there in terms of peace and harmony with others. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not go killing off his enemies. And this was the example left for Muslims, and which was carried out for the most part by advancing armies of Muslims. So on the whole, it seems to me that Islam is indeed a religion of peace, and the misrepresentations of Islam to paint it as being otherwise should be recognized for what it is. And Muslims now have the obligation of clarifying for the public that Islam really means what it says. It is a religion of peace.
Okay then, so it's obvious that it's up to Muslims out here today, these days, to portray Islam in the way it should be portrayed and to clear any misunderstandings that do exist. We thank you for your time. We hope to see you again soon. For now, we're going to take a break. We'll be back shortly.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Welcome back. We're going to continue with our discussion on peace. Another question I had for you was regarding the burning question of whether these suicide bombings are from Islam or not.
Well, there have been different opinions given by Muslim scholars about this. Most Muslim scholars believe that suicide bombings are not allowed in Islam because suicide on the whole is not an Islamic action. The act of taking one's life should be something left to God. And so committing suicide on the whole is prohibited. Some people wondered if in a certain situation an act of ending one's life may not qualify as suicide. Like, for example, one is in the heat of war and the hero rushes forward and he dies in there. One looks at him and thinks, well, this guy is surely plunging into the end of his life. Now, there is a little bit of a shady area there in the heat of battle. But when one deliberately straps himself with explosive devices and then pulls the trigger on himself, this clearly is an act of suicide, and this obviously cannot be allowed in the Islamic law. Now, some others wonder if, for example, in a situation where people have no other means of defending themselves and they are being attacked, they're being subjugated, the land is taken away, they are being oppressed, all kinds of atrocities are being committed against them and so on, would it not be legitimate in this situation to use this as a means of retaliation or at least warding off the attackers? And here too, I will agree with those scholars who feel that, in fact, this is not an allowable and justifiable means. And I see this from a number of different angles. For one thing, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, by his example, actually set up a new way of entering into war, so that he started to draw up laws that would make war more organized and humanitarian, if it can be humanitarian, so that means of war which would decimate large populations, which would create havoc and chaos, should not be employed. And we see that this manner of approaching things, where one goes in as a suicide bomber, it causes chaos. Nothing is regulated anymore. Nothing can be safe. Our airports are no longer safe. Our means of transportation, our nuclear facilities, all of this comes into danger, and the entire population now comes under this kind of threat. So that way of going about it cannot be legitimate. You see, that's very different than when you have two armies fighting against each other, and then the battle is limited among the soldiers. Now, if you take it out into this suicide operation, then you extend it to the wider populace. And this is the final point that should be made about this, that what has generally been called suicide attacks recently have been attacks targeting civilians. And in that case, if that's what is meant by suicide bombings, well, then that is obviously prohibited in the Islamic law, because the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself had advised his followers to not attack civilians. So even in a legitimate war, the women, the children, the monks in their hermits, the elderly, the young, all of the non-combatants in general have to be spared. It is to be a battle between soldiers.
Well, the question that arises is that many people that wage these kind of wars, these terrorist attacks, they try to argue that, a matter of fact, they are at war, where the atrocities that have occurred over the Islamic world, they have been committed silently. Like, for example, many believe the IMF goes in and silently, sort of takes money out of the economy, and thus is waging economic war on them anyways. And this is what they're answering to. What do you do in that case, where there might be some sort of war going on, rather it is not apparent?
Well, in fact, if you want to meet even with even, then you have to fight a similar battle. If there's an economic war going on, well, then fight an economic battle in return. We cannot, enlarge the conflict by using other means which provokes more violence. The Quran says that, as for those who اعتدى عليكم, if they are transgressing against you, فاعتدوا عليه بمثل ما اعتدى عليكم, then meet him with the same kind of force with which he is attacking you. So there is an allowance here for equalizing the floor, but not for committing atrocities.
Okay. So in case of, let's say, the war in Iraq, for example, where the U.S. decided to get up and go in, when Saddam Hussein called for a holy war, or jihad as he called it, is that a permissible form of jihad?
Well, this here is a very tricky situation. It's a very difficult one to comment on, because there is so much that goes on behind the scenes. There's so much politics involved that it's hard really for a non-specialist in political affairs to really get a grip of that. We are still discovering some of the ways in which the dossiers have been they have been sexed up, to use a terminology that is common in the media, in order to justify the war. And so we see that, in fact, the war has not been justified, and we said this from the start on our programs before. On the other hand, there is a question as to whether or not Saddam Hussein himself was justified in calling for a holy war. In fact, he was provoking the situation by not cooperating fully with the weapons inspectors. And so there is a whole history behind this that is difficult to uncoil in a few minutes. We should say on the whole that the war was unjustifiable, but that does not mean that it would have been wise for the Iraqi people to rise up in arms against the invasion. It might have been catastrophical, and perhaps things, though bad as they are, they have worked out with the least amount of harm that could have happened, and that the harm could have been greater if people had actually rallied to a call to jihad and then met the invading forces in an armed confrontation.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. As you can see, today's show revolves around getting to know more about Islam, educating ourselves about Islam. There's a series of lectures that are being held by Brother Shabir Ali entitled What the Public Needs to Know About Islam. Everyone is welcome to these lectures since everyone can benefit from some knowledge of Islam. The next lecture will be held on women's rights. It will be held on Saturday, February the 28th from 6 to 9 p.m. on 1168 Bloor Street West. Please join us there. Before we go into the break, I'm going to let you know that our next session is going to be a question and answer session, so don't go away.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Welcome back. At this point, we're going to look at your questions. Before we get into the questions themselves, we'd like to remind you that if you have questions for us, comments, suggestions, anything you'd like us to know, please visit our website at QuranSpeaks.com, and from there you can get the details as to how you can reach us through mail, email, you can call us, anyhow you like you can reach us. Getting into the question, well, Shabir, one of the questions that we've gotten these days is concerning the stoning ritual performed during Hajj.
Yes, and people are wondering about this because it seems a little bit strange. They haven't heard about this before, and then they hear about people dying during the stoning ritual. What is this all about? Well, the stoning ritual is a very ancient one. It goes back to the tradition of Abraham. The book of Genesis in the Bible tells us that Abraham was commanded to go and sacrifice his son. Now, the Arabs had maintained the tradition that Abraham, as he was about to go and sacrifice his son, he was tempted by the devil. And in response to that, Abraham stoned the devil. But then further along, the devil appeared again, and Abraham stoned him one more time, and then a third time. So 3 pillars have been set up at these locations to mark the spot where Abraham stoned the devil. And then people maintained the tradition over the centuries of ritualistically stoning the devil as well. Stoning this pillar. It's not really the devil, but it gives one a kind of a mental preparation. Now, when Muslims go to perform the pilgrimage, they repeat this ritual in order to get themselves mentally prepared to always be mentally stoning the devil, so to speak. So the devil, according to Islamic theology, comes in, gives you thoughts in your minds, tells you to do certain things, inspires you towards evil. But then your response as a Muslim should be to mentally say, no, I'm stoning you, Satan, get away from me. So one gets mentally prepared like this, and I think it works. You see, if you ask a professional golfer, how do you get that ball from here all the way over there into that faraway hole? He will tell you that, in fact, before he hits that ball, he gets himself mentally prepared. He can visualize the exact arc that this ball will follow in order to land in the hole far away. And by getting himself mentally prepared in this way, then his brain will instruct all of the limbs in his body to cooperate in a particular way so that he will stand in the right way, he will hit the ball from the right angle, he will with the right amount of force, and so on, so that that ball will follow that arc exactly. Of course, it doesn't do so immediately without practice, but over time with practice and this kind of creative visualization, he eventually gets it right, and that ball follows the course exactly. So in a similar way, Muslims, by performing this ritual, they go through this mental exercise of getting themselves mentally prepared for meeting the devil in the wider world.
Now, isn't there any way to actually save lives? In this case, where this ritual does make sense, and it is a part of Hajj, and I'm sure it's been happening for years and years now, haven't they figured out any way of actually stopping that stampede, from saving people from actually dying during this ritual?
Yes, there is a way actually, and in fact over time the authorities have made gradual improvements to the way in which things are done in order to maintain human welfare. One of the things they have done over time is to create another platform so that people can go from above and stone from there. They have obviously lengthened the pillar for that purpose, so some stone from the higher level and some from the lower level, thus minimizing the crowd on each level. One further thing that could be done is that lanes could be made so that people can only access the pillars by going through well-ordered lanes, in which case nobody can crush each other because they go in one way, come out the other, the traffic flows continuously in one direction, and everything is a breeze. You go, you stone, you continue on. What happens now is that because there are no such lanes, people are coming in throngs, trying to get close up so they can get an aim, and those who finish stoning are trying to get out, and so there is turbulence with forces pushing inward and forces pushing outward, and somebody falls, and if he falls, then he gets crushed. So that could easily be avoided, and it is up to the authorities now to look into that and to create such lanes, which makes sense. It's just a simple operation, and things will be very orderly.
Thank you for your answer. Another question we have for you is regarding the hijab issue. With France banning the hijab, Muslim women still go out on the streets and they protest this. What is the reason for all this?
Well, I think many people find it difficult to understand why Muslim women will be supporting the availability and the use of the hijab. Many would think that Muslim women want to be liberated from the hijab, but actually quite the contrary. There are different opinions about this, of course. Some people want to be liberated from it, and some others want to be liberated with it. And I think this is a larger voice in the Muslim world right now, especially in relation to this move by France to ban it. Because even if somebody was not taking it seriously before, now she wants to take it seriously because she sees this as a kind of a challenge to her own core values. It is not just simply a matter of saying, look, you do not have to wear the hijab if you don't want to. This is saying, no, you cannot wear it because we know what is better for you. And even if a Muslim woman was not taking the hijab seriously previously, now she wants to take it seriously because she feels that her very faith is being challenged, that somehow someone out there feels that Islam is a rising power and wants to crush the advance of Islam, wants to force people to either melt away from Islam or to now take it seriously. And many are actually, in fact, deciding that the best way out for us is to take it seriously. You can liberate me from some oppressive practices, but you cannot liberate me from my God. Now, when many Muslim women observe the hijab with the conviction that this is the way in which they please God, to liberate them from that would be to take them away from the God that they believe in. And this is what others need to understand as well when they try to frame laws and when they try to speak to Muslim women. Now, to continue with that, it is important to understand that many Muslim women would feel, in fact, quite naked. They would feel raped without the hijab. So for this Muslim women, it has to be allowed for them to practice the hijab if that is how they choose to live. And Western authorities ought to cooperate with them in that.
Thank you for your answer. That concludes that session. We're near the end of our show, but before we go, we'd like to remind you to go online at www.quranspeaks.com. Please donate generously, help our cause. Also, when you are there, submit your comments, your questions, anything that you can give us to benefit this show, and we will try our best to incorporate that within our show. We'd like to thank you for joining us this time. Please join us next time. Peace be with you.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu